Begin in the UK, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson has launched an inquiry into claims made by a Muslim lawmaker, Nusrat Ghani, that she was sacked because of her faith. She says when she was fired from a ministerial job in government, she was told her Muslimness was making colleagues uncomfortable. Ghani has welcomed the news that there will be an inquiry, but she says she wants to know its terms of reference. The man at the centre of Ghani's allegations is the government's chief whip, Mark Spencer. He says the claims are completely false and defamatory. Britain's Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, says the claims are incredibly serious, but he's declined to say whether he believes his former government colleague.
Well, first of all, it's a very serious allegation, a very serious claim, and we take it very seriously. There can be no discrimination, Islamophobia or any other kind of discrimination in the Conservative Party. The Chief Whip has overnight made it clear that the allegation is in relation to him, this is Mark Spencer, and he categorically has denied it in what can only be described as the most strenuous terms. What we would say, and what I would say, is that if there's ever any complaint like this, particularly one as serious as this, a formal complaint should be made and it would then be investigated. And this relates back to 2020, and all I would just say, as a matter of fact, no formal complaint has been made, but we take this incredibly seriously.
Nusrat Ghani was sacked as a junior transport minister in a reshuffle in 2020. She says she was told by the Tory whips that her Muslim woman minister status was making colleagues feel uncomfortable. In an interview with the Sunday Times, Ghani says she felt humiliated and powerless. And Boris Johnson continues to fight to try and shore up his premiership. He is waiting for the findings of what could be a make-or-break investigation into alleged lockdown parties at Downing Street. The Prime Minister's former senior advisor, Dominic Cummings, is expected to have an interview with the investigation team today. That investigation is being carried out by Cabinet Office official Sue Gray. Police officers who guard Downing Street have reportedly been interviewed, and the Telegraph newspaper claims they've given damning evidence. The Prime Minister's given a variety of explanations about the parties. First, he said he'd been assured no rules had been broken. He has, though, since apologised to the British people over some of the gatherings. He denies knowing about a bring-your-own-booze lockdown gathering on May the 20th, 2020 in advance. Despite having attended it, he says he mistook it for a work event. Well, we're joined now by our London correspondent Benji Hire. Benji, those new claims from Nusrat Ghani, let's start there, about why she was sacked from government. How much extra pressure do they pile on the Prime Minister?
Ollie, these are very serious allegations that could potentially seriously taint the reputation of this government. As you mentioned in their introduction, these are to do with allegations regarding a meeting that happened several years ago now, but those comments in the meeting, if they are true, could, as I say, be fairly significant because of the racial connotations that are involved here. Her allegation that the Chief Whip at the time said to her that her Muslim identity would be causing a problem for other Conservative colleagues. Now, what's interesting is that Mark Spencer, who's the current Chief Whip, was not named by Ghani in her complaints, but he almost came out and admitted that he was at the centre of these accusations. But you also heard before the fact that he denies those. He's come out with a quote to say that these allegations are completely false and he considers them defamatory. But he does remain Chief Whip. So what we have here are comments directed at someone who is still holding a senior position within Boris Johnson's cabinet. Now, an investigation has been launched. That has been welcomed, of course, by Nusrat Ghani. And that this might provide a bit of respite for Prime Minister Boris Johnson because it's sort of standard practice within Westminster for ministers, indeed the Prime Minister as well, not to comment on inquiries whilst that investigation is ongoing. But there's still scrutiny from elsewhere. In the past couple of days, further revelations about the activity of whips, potential proper in conduct, about how they are trying to convince MPs to vote with government. Those matters have been handed over to the police. And also that so-called Partygate, the list of accusations and revelations about gatherings in Downing Street during the height of lockdown. And so the Prime Minister is in for another very difficult couple of days.
And Benji, on that note, Sue Gray and that investigation into claims of parties in and around Downing Street, when do we expect her to file that report?
It's not certain when, and we could be waiting a short while longer. The reason being is something you alluded to before, the fact that she's now going to be sitting down with the Prime Minister's former chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, someone who was at the centre of Number 10 operations for so many months, now finds himself on the outside, and someone who is critical of the government's decisions, especially in light of those revelations regarding those potential lockdown parties. She's speaking to him. She's already spoken to police. We had imagined that the report would be out in the next couple of days. However, that could be delayed. As she would provide a version when published to Boris Johnson and Number 10 and then release it publicly in the hours or days subsequently. And we've also heard that Prime Minister Boris Johnson would want to address the House of Commons, his colleagues, MPs, imminently in order to kind of set his side of the story straight when that report does eventually get released.
And when it does eventually get released, Benji, of course, we don't know what's going to be in it, but do we expect at that point that more Conservative MPs would use that moment to try and remove Boris Johnson as their leader?
I think the answer depends on what is indeed in that report. We've had a number of Conservative MPs coming forward and admitting that however critical they've been of Boris Johnson, they are going to wait to see exactly what that report says and then in the days after that decide what to do. One of those, for instance, David Davies, the former Conservative Party leadership candidate who, you might recall, stood up in the House of Commons, addressed Prime Minister Boris Johnson directly and said, "In the name of God, go." Even he is saying that he has not put in a letter calling for Boris Johnson to resign until he sees the findings of that investigation. But one important thing to remember is that Sue Gray, who is a very influential and senior civil servant, is not the judge, jury and executioner here. She is unlikely to advise that Prime Minister Boris Johnson should resign, for instance, because of what she finds in this report. And therefore, if Boris Johnson can kind of weather the storm and see through this report and see through attempts to overthrow him, as he's done in the past couple of days, then he may be able to survive this particular report and continue to be Prime Minister.
OK, thanks, Benji.